And it all started when I met up with Holy Smoke, a charity in Las Vegas that feeds the homeless in the tunnels. They said they'd go down there with me to bring exposure to this problem and interview the people living there if we donated $900.
What's that one? That's good.
Today marks the beginning of our annual Scarathon, where for the entire month of October, all I do is tell you true, scary campfire stories. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to sing at the Like Button's wedding for free, and then when it's time for their first dance, sing a rendition of Du Hast by Rammstein in an Australian accent. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In June of 2019, an 18-year-old girl named Bella wrapped up her first year in college and headed home for the summer. Her family lived just outside of this small town in France that was tucked up in the mountains and surrounded by this huge forest. And so growing up, Bella spent a lot of her time out in this forest, either by herself or with her father or other members of her family. And so she knew the forest like the back of her hand. Her favorite place to go in this forest was the man-made lake that sat kind of at the center of this forest. It wasn't huge, but it was a beautiful view, it was very peaceful, and so she liked going out there. The way she would get to it is she would leave her house, she would hop in her car, she would drive a couple of miles down the road, and she would pull off into the shoulder of this road, and there was no signage that said this was the pull-off to get to the man-made lake. This was an area that she and her family had discovered, that there was this particular trail you could take. And so she would pull off at this shoulder, she would get out, and she would turn away from the road and just walk directly into the trees, which butted right up against the road. And very quickly, after walking into the woods, after going through some thick underbrush, she would reach this kind of clearing and she would see up ahead this little stream. And off to the left side of this stream is what looked like this kind of beaten up little footpath, but actually what it was an animal trail. So animals just kind of made their way around this area all the time, and so it kind of carved out a path. And so Bella would walk down to this animal path, and she would walk along the path that kind of went parallel with the stream, and she would walk for maybe 15 or 20 minutes until this animal path veered hard to the left, kind of went away from the stream. At that point, Bella would abandon the animal path and just continue walking along this stream, both stepping in the stream on some rocks and standing on either side when she could. And she would follow the stream due north, just going straight into the heart of this forest for about an hour, walking at a fairly leisurely pace until the stream connected with this east to west running river. And at this point, Bella would turn left, facing west, and she would follow along this riverbank about 20 minutes until the river fed into the man-made lake. And so she would stay at this lake, sitting on a rock, enjoy the view, and look at the animals, and listen to nature all around her. And then at some point, she would turn around and retrace her steps all the way back to her car. For reference, one leg of this journey from car to lake, or from lake to car, took about 2 hours. Part of the reason Bella really enjoyed being in these woods and being at this lake was because it just kind of felt like they were hers. Because up until this summer in 2019, the only other people that Bella had ever seen anywhere in this forest or near this lake were other members of her family. So it really felt very private. So in June of that year, Bella comes home from college, and almost immediately she wants to go out to the man-made lake because she hasn't been in months. She's been in school, and so she's eager to get back to some place that she kind of considered to be her happy place. So one morning she gets up early, and by herself she leaves her house, she hops in her car, she drives the couple miles down the road, she pulls off onto that shoulder, she parks her car, she hops out, she turns away from the road, she walks into the forest, she finds the stream and starts walking along that animal path right to the side of the stream. She walks for a few minutes until she reaches the point where the trail kind of cuts to the left, and she just stays on the stream and is just continuing walking along the stream. And about 30 minutes later, when she was maybe 1 or 2 miles short of the east-west running river, she hears a bell somewhere off in the distance, way out in front of her, out towards the river. It sounds just like a chime, a single chime. And as soon as she hears it, she stops, because there's never any people out here, ever. And that bell sound came from somewhere in the forest. And so she stops because she's not really sure if she actually heard that, because it could have just been her mind playing tricks on her or something. And so she stops and just kind of listens for a second, and then she starts to hear this bell just continuously start ringing. Now, the ringing was not uniform. It was constant, but it was kind of sporadic, as if you were holding a bell and kind of ringing it randomly, like you might see at a sports game. And so she's thinking to herself, is there a dog that got lost somewhere up ahead, and it's got a bell on its collar, and and that's the sound I'm hearing. But as she's sitting there listening to this kind of sporadic bell sound, she's thinking, that's way too loud to be some rinky-dink bell on a pet's collar. So it's got to be something more robust. Did maybe somebody have a bell inside of a box, and that box got on the river, and it's floated down river, and it's like crashing into rocks or something? I mean, she's going through these very strange scenarios in her head, but she's not concerned about the bell. She's actually pretty intrigued, and since the sound of this bell seemed to be coming from the direction she was already traveling, she decided she would just keep on walking and hopefully see whatever it was that was causing this bell sound. And so Bella just began walking along the stream again, kind of listening to this bell and thinking about what it was going to be. And after about 5 minutes of her starting to walk again, the bell just stops. It goes totally silent. And when it does, it actually kind of startles Bella because she'd been listening to it so intently, and so she stops and she's listening, kind of expecting it to go off some more, but it doesn't. All she hears are the sounds of nature all around her. Now, Bella didn't have an explanation for what the spell was or why it stopped, but she really just wasn't that worried about it. She figured there was some sort of explanation for it. There had to be. And so she just kind of shrugged and kept on walking and put her focus back on getting to the lake. About 10 or 15 minutes later, Bella was still walking along the stream. She was still maybe a half mile or a mile short of the east to west running river when she sees up ahead on the left side of the stream as she's walking, there appears to be something laying on the ground that looks like it could be an animal or a rock. She doesn't really know what it is. And as she gets closer, she realizes it's a beaver laying on the ground, and this beaver is missing its head. Now, this is a huge forest, and Bella would have known that, of course, there are wild animals all over the place, and so finding the body of an animal that had been attacked by another animal was not unusual. That's nature. But what did strike Bella as odd was the cut on this beaver's neck was unbelievably neat and uniform, as if its head had been very carefully removed with a very sharp knife. And the beaver's head was nowhere to be found. It certainly did not have the appearance of having its head removed from some predator and its teeth. That would have been very rough. Also, the rest of the beaver's body was intact, so whatever killed this beaver was not interested in eating the beaver. As Bella stood over this beaver and was just staring at it, she also noted that there was no smell. Normally, when something dies, it begins to smell very quickly. It's part of the decomposition process. And so for there not to be a smell indicated to Bella that this beaver must have been killed fairly recently. And then when Bella kind of gently prodded the body with her foot, she realized the beaver's body was still fairly limp, so rigor mortis had not set in. Rigor mortis is another part of the decomposition process where the body kind of stiffens up, and that happens fairly soon after death. And so as Bella is realizing this beaver must have died very recently, it dawns on her that most likely whoever or whatever has killed this beaver is probably somewhere nearby. And Bella can't help but connect this dead beaver to that bell she was hearing earlier, which before meant nothing, but considering the bell was roughly coming from the same area where this beaver has now been found, it made her uneasy. And so Bella found herself whipping her head around, looking out into the trees, seeing if, there's some person, a hunter or somebody that would kind of explain what was going on, but there was nothing. And so Bella felt herself starting to panic a little bit, but then she stopped herself and said, "Calm down, it's broad daylight. I have been coming to these woods for years and years. I've never seen another person. I've never encountered some predatory animal. I'm sure everything is perfectly fine. I got nothing to worry about." And so she stepped over the beaver and kept on walking. Bella would eventually reach the east-west running river. She would turn left and walk for 20 minutes alongside this river. She'd reach the man-made lake. She enjoyed the beautiful view and the scenery, and then at some point she turned around and began retracing her footsteps. She walked past the beaver on the ground all the way back to her car, and she went home. A week later, Bella was sitting around her house when she felt pretty bored and decided kind of abruptly that in order to cure her boredom, she would go back to the place she loved so much, the man-made lake. And so she told her parents where she was going, and then she left the house, hopped in her car, drove to the pull-off, and parked and entered the woods at 6 p.m. Sunset that night was at 9 p.m., and so Bella knew this would need to be a fairly quick turnaround so she didn't get trapped in the woods in the dark. And so Bella finds the animal trail. She follows along the stream until the trail goes left, and she stays on the stream. She continues walking on the stream when she starts to hear the distant sound of thunder. And so she looks up into the sky through the trees, and she can see the sky is starting to get dark, but she's still a couple of hours away from sunset. And so between the thunder and the dark skies, she knows a storm is rolling in. But she is determined to get to that lake. And so instead of, turning around and saying, okay, I'll come back another time, she just starts jogging along the stream to get there as fast as she possibly can. And almost immediately as she's jogging, the raindrops start to fall. And by the time she passes the beaver corpse on the ground, it hadn't moved, the rain was really coming down. And then about 15 minutes after the corpse, when she hit the east-west running river, that's when the rain was at a full downpour. Still, Bella turned at the river and continued west towards the man-made lake as if she was going to go all the way, but only about a minute or two into this final leg. She still had about 20 minutes to get to the lake. She stops herself and she looks at her watch and she can see it's after 8 o'clock already, and she's thinking to herself, if I turn around right now, it's going to take me over an hour to get back to my car. Sun sets at 9 p.m., it's after 8 p.m. now, so already I know I'm going to have to navigate this forest at night in the dark, even if it's just for a little bit at the end. And if I go all the way to the lake and then come all the way back to the car, I'm going to be in the forest after dark for quite a while, maybe up to an hour. And she's thinking, I'm confident I can do that, but it's also pouring rain, I'm cold. If I get lost, this could turn into a very bad situation. And so she ultimately decides that even though she really wants to keep going, she needs to turn around, she needs to head back. And so she turns around and she walks back up alongside this east-west running river to where the stream fed into that river. She turns and begins walking south along this stream, headed back towards the car. On her walk, because the visibility was starting to get quite bad because it was so dark, she had her head down at the ground because she didn't want to trip. She's stepping on rocks, she's stepping on muddy areas. She wants to make sure her footing is solid. And so her head is down, the rain is pounding all around her, and she's walking for about 15 minutes when all of a sudden, something hits her in the top of the head. And so reflexively, she looks up and kind of puts her hands in front of her face to protect herself, and she sees what she had just run into. It was the beaver corpse. It was hanging from a string that was dangling off a branch right above her. And this beaver's head had been retrieved, and the head had been stitched onto the front paws of this beaver. And so she's looking at this beaver that's dangling from this rope, it's carrying its own head, and she's walked square into it. And her first reaction was basically to gag. She was going to vomit. She was so disgusted. And then she began frantically rubbing at her hair where this thing had made contact with her because there could be juices from the decomposition that got on her. And then after frantically kind of patting at her head for a second, she stops, and something really terrifying dawns on her. Whoever strung this beaver up to this tree and then stitched its head onto its paws, they had done that in the last 30 minutes, because 30 minutes earlier, when she was on her way in, she remembered passing the beaver carcass on the ground. She saw it. It had not moved from where it was the week before when she first saw it, and now this beaver is strung up in the tree. And so as the wheels are turning in Bella's head, she realizes that if someone has just done this, then they are probably nearby. And at this point, it's really starting to get dark. The rain is pounding all around her, and she starts whipping her head around, looking in all directions to see if there's someone out there that did this. But as she's looking, all she sees is just dark forest in all directions. And she knows she's at least 1 hour, even if she runs from her car. And so suddenly, she is totally panicked. And in an effort to calm herself down, she says to herself, okay, I need to get out of here, but I have to walk. If I start running right now, this is going to turn into a complete nightmare. I just have to try to walk. And so she walks around this dangling beaver corpse and starts walking along the stream. And as soon as she's past that corpse, she feels the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She can hear movement behind her. She doesn't know what it is. It could be a deer, it could be some animal, but she's too afraid to turn around. And even though she was trying to tell herself to calm down, just keep walking, you're safe, you're freaking yourself out, everything is okay, as she's walking, she could feel herself starting to speed up until finally she was just running down the stream, sprinting actually away from this beaver and whatever it was that was moving around in that area. And at some point, she got so winded from sprinting so fast that she came to a stop, maybe 5 or 6 minutes after seeing this beaver. And as soon as she comes to a stop and she's walking, she still hasn't turned around yet, she hears the sound of that bell. And right away, it's the exact same sound she had heard the week before. It's that kind of constant, sporadic sound of someone ringing a bell. But in her panic state, she doesn't know where it's coming from. She's so scared. Her anxiety is so high. She doesn't know if it's behind her or if it's off to the side. It's now completely dark out. And so she is full-blown terrified. There is someone or something behind her that has strung this beaver up that's probably watching her, and she can't see them. Even though she's beyond winded, she can barely breathe, she just starts sprinting as fast as she can. And as she's stumbling and falling on the rocks and tripping because she's not really looking where she's going, in the background and all around her, she's hearing this bell chiming, and she's hearing something moving around in the woods behind her, and she pulls her phone out of her pocket, her iPhone, and as she's running, she dials her father, she puts the phone to her ear, she's crying, she's panting, she can barely breathe. Her father picks up, and she's so relieved to hear his voice, but she can't even make a sentence. She just starts crying and wailing and pleading with him. Dad, come out to the forest. Meet me at the spot where the trail veers away from the stream. Meet me there. There's someone in the forest that's chasing me, and I can't see them. Her father, on the other end of the phone, he didn't know what to make of this, but he could hear the primal fear in his daughter's voice. And so he didn't ask any questions. He said, stay on the line. I'm coming to meet you right now. So Bella's father and mother, with Bella on the line, they run out of their house. They hop in their car. They speed the couple miles down the road. They park next to their daughter's car. And as they're running into the woods, they can hear way off in the woods the sound of the bell. They can hear the bell. They hear their daughter screaming on the phone. They can hear the bell coming through the phone, and she's begging them to please come into the woods, come in here, save me. And so the parents run into the woods and they begin running up the stream. Meanwhile, Bella, who's way out in the woods, she's still 10 or 15 minutes away from her parents. She is barely able to run at this point. She's exhausted almost all of her energy, and as she's getting closer and closer to her parents, the sporadic bell sound is getting louder and louder and louder, like whatever it is gaining on her. And she can hear behind her all these sticks and branches. They're breaking as if something is coming up to her. And finally, when it feels like this bell is right behind her head, she just kind of stops in defeat. She's too far away from her parents. She can't get to them in time. And so it was almost like she had to turn around and finally look at whatever it was that was behind her. And so terrified beyond words, Bella, who can barely breathe, she's so scared and so tired, she slowly turns around. Now, when she turns around and she's facing the other direction, she's looking across this clearing. She just happened to run past this clearing, and because it was a clearing, there was a little bit of moonlight that was coming down through the trees, just enough to illuminate this space that was about 50 feet wide. And as she's looking across this clearing, at first, she doesn't see anything. And then this tall, dark figure walks into the clearing, and as soon as it steps in, she can see it's got a bell at its waist. And with every step it took, it would violently ring the bell, causing the ringing sound. And so this thing starts moving into the clearing, and as Bella is staring at it, it was like time slowed down. She could not process what she was looking at. She didn't know what she was looking at. All she knew is whatever or whoever this is, they're coming straight at me. And so Bella suddenly got this unbelievable adrenaline rush. It was like her body went into autopilot to save her, and she turned around and began sprinting faster than she had ever sprinted in her life. And as she ran, all she could hear was the sound of that bell, which she now knew represented steps this thing was taking. And so the bell was getting faster and faster and louder, and she knew it was gaining on her. And she began lying and screaming out loud that, I'm on the phone with the police, they're right up ahead, they're gonna be here any moment. But whatever it was that was behind her, they weren't fazed. They were just charging ahead, gaining on her second by second. Meanwhile, her parents had made it to the meeting spot, but her father, he felt like, I can't just sit here, and he just starts charging into the woods. He can hear his daughter screaming. He can hear this bell getting louder and louder. He just starts running towards it. And sure enough, seconds later, he sees his daughter come bounding out of the forest, and she leaps into his arms. He just grabs her, turns around, and runs with her back to the meeting spot. He grabs his wife, and the three of them just charge out of the forest, back to the parking lot, back in their car, and they speed off. In the car, all of them are crying. They don't know what to make of what just happened. Bella's trying to describe it, but she can't. And her parents, they had been on the phone listening to their daughter screaming, and all they kept saying to each other, the parents, was, I heard the bell. I heard the bell. I heard the bell. As if the bell confirmed their worst nightmares, that there really was someone or something out in those woods that was trying to do harm to their child. They would drive straight to the police station where Bella would file a report about what she experienced out in the forest. And then afterwards, her parents, as a precaution, took her to the hospital where she was determined to be okay, besides some bumps and bruises from falling down. The following morning, the police went out to the forest, to the area where Bella had explained where she had been, and they searched all along that animal foot trail and all along the stream, but They never found any sign of this dark figure with the bell. Bella would tell police that she had a handbag, and as she was running back, she dropped the bag. She remembered where she dropped it along the stream, but when the police went to that area, the bag was gone. Also, the beaver was no longer there. It was not tied up to the tree, it was not on the ground, it was gone. The only thing police found that was out of the ordinary was they found a little ways off from the stream, basically along the path that Bella would have been running on, they found a t-shirt neatly folded, placed underneath a rock. But the police and Bella and her family have no idea what that signifies. Ultimately, the police told Bella and her family that more than likely what she ran into was some kind of mentally unstable person that was living out in the woods, and perhaps when Bella came into the woods, they felt like she was on their property, and so they kind of tried to scare her off. But Bella has a hard time accepting that. She felt like, as she was running from whoever was behind her, that she was in mortal danger. That had it not been for her father running into the woods and literally grabbing her and running with her the rest of the way, that she may not have gotten out of the woods at all, that she might have been attacked and killed by whoever this was. She also can't help, when she looks back at the entire experience, thinking about that moment when she turned around and looked across that clearing and saw this figure come into the moonlight for the first time. That when it came into the moonlight, the way it was moving, the steps it was taking, they weren't normal, they were abnormal. There was just something off about this thing's movement, that it didn't seem like she was looking at a person, but rather some big animal. But regardless, since her ordeal, there have been no strange sightings out in those woods. However, almost no one ever goes in those woods except for Bella and her family, and Bella and her family, they don't go in those woods anymore. So whoever or whatever is out there is still just out there. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments section what it is and where you found it. And if you're the first person to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please offer to sing at the Like Button's wedding, and then when it's time for them to have their first dance, sing a rendition of Du Hast by Ramstein in an Australian accent. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 2 or 3 video uploads. We are now selling merchandise like flannels and hats and hoodies and all sorts of stuff. If you're interested, go to shopmrballin.com. If you want to learn about upcoming deals and promotions for our merchandise, go to our shop's Instagram page. The username is shopmrballin. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's johnballin416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok, where my username is Mr. Ballin. We also have a second YouTube channel called Mr. Ballin Shorts, where we post random short videos and lost episodes. We also have a Facebook page just called Mr. Ballin, where we post condensed versions of the longer episodes you see on YouTube. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballin. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's gonna do it. See ya. Last year, I stayed for about 2 weeks in a cabin in a very rural part of Pennsylvania. We were up in the mountains. We were very isolated from everybody else. There were these huge windows on the back side of the house that just looked directly into a forest. At night, when you're looking out that window and it's just totally dark, you feel so uneasy that something could be looking in and you can't see it. And so it was just this awful sense of being watched if I was even near that back room at night. And I think that that all comes from this deep-seated fear I have of being isolated in the woods somewhere, being stalked or being watched by something that you can't see. And so anytime I see a story about some cabin in the woods where some potentially paranormal thing has happened around them, it really piques my interest because I can relate to that fear on a primal level. And so today we have, you guessed it, a cabin in the woods stalking story. It was featured on Paranormal Witness, which is a show on Sci-Fi Network. It's one of the more popular episodes called The Cabin, and it's one of my all-time favorites, and I hope I do it justice in today's story. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel, because that's all I do on this channel, and I upload 3 to 4 times, sometimes even 5 times every week. So if that's something you're interested in, then I would encourage you to gently drop kick the like button, and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of those weekly 3 to 4 to 5 videos that I do every single week. All right, let's get into today's story. Keith and Diane grew up in the same town, London, Ohio, which was a very rural, small town in the middle of Ohio. They were high school sweethearts, and after high school, they would end up getting married. Fast forward 6 years, and Keith and Diane have been married for 6 years. They have a daughter named Raven, who's 4 years old, and Diane has just found this beautiful new home in London, Ohio, so same place they grew up, that was a little more isolated than any other properties they were looking at. It was still within London, Ohio, but it was in the forest. It was way off the beaten path, so to speak. But, Keith was a hunter and he loved the forest, and, Diane loved the forest too, so they liked the idea of having that privacy and kind of living away from other people. So very quickly they decide to buy the house, and they move in and they kind of settle into their new routine. At this time, Keith was not only working full-time during the day as a welder, but at night he was taking night classes to prepare for this apprenticeship program he was trying to get into. Keith is gone 5 days a week for 12 hours at a stretch, leaving Diane home alone with Raven when she wasn't at school. And Diane was a stay-at-home mom, so she was at this house a lot. So in those first couple of weeks that they had moved into this house, and Diane's getting used to being alone quite a bit, Diane at night would hear what sounded like something she described as scampering. Some animal is moving around outside of the house. And from time to time, she'd poke her head out. She had this big window that sat over the kitchen sink. So whenever she was doing dishes, she'd be looking directly into their forest in their backyard, and she'd poke her head out and she'd try to get a glimpse of whatever it was. She just assumed it was, a deer or a dog or something like that. It wasn't a cause for concern. It was just something she noticed within those first couple of weeks. One night, after she had put Raven to bed and Keith was still out at night school, Diane was cleaning up the downstairs and she was doing the dishes, and she was looking out the window and she starts hearing that scampering sound. And as she's looking, she's got light behind her from inside the house, causing kind of a glare on the glass. So she's up close to the pane of glass, kind of peering out to try to catch a glimpse of this deer or dog or whatever it was. And as she's looking out into the tree line, which is very close to her house, there's only a separation of maybe 20 or 25 feet from the edge of her house to the edge of the forest. And as she's looking, she swears she sees a set of eyes looking back at her. And to her, it immediately confirms that that's a dog. There's a dog that's gotten loose, and that's what's been roaming around my property. She's not frightened. She's used to being out near the woods. So she's just like, okay, cool, it's a dog. And so she finishes the dishes, and she goes into the living room, which is on the other side of the house. And as she's picking up toys and moving things around, she happens to look up towards the window in their living room that's looking basically in the other direction as that window above her sink. She's looking in the opposite direction. And to her horror, there is a set of eyes that are at human level that are right up against the glass. She only sees it for a second. She sees the reflection of the eyes before she backs away startled. But there's light on in the room she's in, so she doesn't have a great view of what's outside. And she's not even sure if she actually saw those eyes. She's not sure if she's scaring herself. So she goes back into the kitchen to look out that window and see if she can see those eyes that she had seen before that she believed belonged to a dog. She was hoping that they would be gone and that would kind of account for the eyes she just saw at the living room window, even though it would have been a very tall dog. She goes into the kitchen, she starts leaning towards the window, and then right as she's about to put her head almost against the glass, a head comes right in front of her on the opposite side of the glass with these glowing gold eyes looking right at her. She's horrified. She practically falls over, and she's looking up from the ground, and there's this face looking in the window directly at her. And she's scampering back, like on the ground, getting out of the kitchen, and right at that moment, she hears car tires out on the driveway. And it's Keith. Oh my God, Keith's gonna run into somebody that's outside. She hears the door open, and she's just praying it's Keith, and sure enough, he calls out, and he sees her on the ground in the living room, and he's like, what's going on? And so she immediately tells him she definitely saw somebody outside. She thought it was a dog, maybe it wasn't. And Keith, he's a hunter, he knows they're out in the woods. They've just moved into this house. He's thinking maybe my wife is actually a little bit scared to be so isolated out here. Keith goes outside with a flashlight. He's looking all around. He's walking the property. He can't find tracks. He can't see anything. And so he comes back inside, and He never really believed that it was anything other than maybe her imagination or just some random animal outside. And so he's just telling her, like, hey, I know we just moved in. I'm sure you're stressed. You're here alone all the time. You know, you got this huge woods right next to our house. You're going to hear animals. I just wouldn't sweat it. It's probably nothing to worry about. She was not cool with being, told don't worry about it because she knows what she saw. So a month goes by and Keith and Diane have stopped talking about whatever Diane saw. There wasn't anything else happening at the house. She wasn't seeing eyes or animals, hearing any scampering sounds. It was just kind of back to normal. Keith is gone. He's going to night school, and Diane's home by herself, and she's in the kitchen. She's looking out that window. She doesn't hear any scampering or anything, and without any warning, she sees a set of eyes suddenly appear on the edge of the window just outside of the woods. She sees the eyes dead on, and she backs up from the window. She's thinking to herself, I have to protect Raven. And her first thought is turn off all the lights in the house. That way it can't see me. And so she runs around the house, terrified, but knew she had to do it, turning off every light. The last light she turns off is the living room light, and she's up against the wall, and as she hits the light in the living room, making everything dark, she suddenly gets a clear picture out that living room window where she had seen the eyes as well the month earlier. And standing pressed against the glass is an absolute human figure with eyes at human level, these orange glowing eyes at eye level, standing right against her window, looking in the window directly at her. Horrified, she starts making her way into the kitchen by sliding up against the wall. They have a landline phone that was hung in the kitchen. And so she gets to the phone, trying to keep an eye on that back window. She can see the side of this thing's silhouette. She calls 911 and says there's someone outside my house, they won't go away. As soon as she hangs up, from her perspective, she can only see its shoulder. She watched the shoulder disappear out of her view. She poked her head back in the living room, and sure enough, it's gone. And as she's sitting there, it's silent. There's no sound in the house. She can hear clear scampering sounds, like running sounds outside of her house, as this thing is running all the way around her house. And she's sitting there wondering if this thing's going to break a window to come inside. What would she even do? And so finally, she sees the flashing lights of a cop car pulling into the driveway, and she hears the police knock at the door. She runs to the door, opens it up, and she's hysterical, and the police are trying to calm her down to just get the story of what's going on, and she's pointing out, saying there's something out there, and the police start looking around the property. Keith comes home, and he knows instinctively what's probably happened, because the police are scanning the property for something, and he's thinking she saw this thing again, whatever it is, probably was just a reflection of herself in the glass, and now she's called the police. This is a small town. Keith is worried that people are going to think he's crazy. And so he comes in, and he regretted this, but he immediately got mad at his wife. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're calling the cops, like, there's nothing here. I looked last time, they're looking now, and they were even saying, like, we haven't seen anything, we're going to look for a little bit longer, but there's no sign of anybody being here. And at some point, the police are like, yep, we didn't find anything, and the police are like, let us know if anything else happens, and they leave. Keith and Diane are left just fighting. So 4 months go by without incident. There's no scampering outside, there's no eyes in the windows, and Keith and Diane have kind of moved past that whole ordeal, and they're, back to normal. They're really not even thinking about it. And even Diane would say, like, I did begin to believe that it was just in my imagination and that I was just stressed and maybe overwhelmed at how often I was alone in that house, and it was just getting to me. And 4 months go by. It's early December of 1981, and it was the first big snowfall of the winter. And Keith wakes up one morning after the snowfall, a few inches on the ground, and he decides, because his family's still sleeping, that he's going to go out and he's going to get donuts and bring them back for the family, donuts and coffee. So it's still dark outside. He goes outside, starts up his car, he's rubbing his eyes, he's still tired. He's adjusting his rear view mirror, and when he stops it for a second and he's looking up there, he thinks he sees somebody standing behind his car. What? And he readjusts it and he looks, and it's gone. And so he throws the car in park, grabs his flashlight, and he starts looking around because he knows he just saw someone standing behind his car. And so he's walking around shining his light, and he's realizing the irony of this situation. This is the same situation that his wife was in, believing she saw somebody outside their house, looking for it, it's nowhere to be found. He just saw someone standing, saw the eyes of a person, standing behind his vehicle, can't find this person. And he's thinking, was there any truth in what she saw? Was I wrong? And so he's looking everywhere, and all of a sudden he sees tracks. He He can't tell what kind of tracks they are, but there's clear prints in the snow. It's fresh snow. He knows where he had been walking, and he starts following them, thinking he's going to get to either a person or he doesn't know what, and he sees they stop right next to his house. And he's looking like, where could they have gone? And then he looks up to there was a first floor section of the house that was a little bit extended. So there was a roof that was at the first floor level, and then there was the rest of the house that was at the second floor level. And he sees that the footsteps go from the ground to the first floor roof, and then they go up to the second floor roof, and they go over to the other side of the house. Who's doing this? What's doing this? And so he starts going to the other side of the house, and he can't see any more prints. And he's looking up at the top of his house, and he's thinking, am I going crazy? Something's on my house? Like, what's going on? And so he goes inside, and he calls his hunting buddy, Dennis, who's the only person that lives relatively close to them. And he's like, you gotta come over here right now. I got something weird going on. I think someone's stalking my house. I can't be sure. You gotta come over here. Dennis is like, I'll be there in a minute. When Dennis gets there, Keith's outside with his rifle, and Dennis is like, what are you doing? And he's like, somebody, and he shows him the prints, jumped on my roof. Someone's on my roof. I don't know what's going on, but someone I think is on my roof. And as they're talking about it, they hear what sounds like thump. Something just landed really hard from a pretty high distance. And it was on the other side of the house. They kind of run around, rifle, and Dennis had his rifle too. They go to the other side, and they see like two clear footprints, but 20 feet away from the edge of the house. Meaning this thing on the roof, if it jumped off, it jumped not only 2 stories to the ground, but it jumped 20 feet out away from the house as well, because there was no other footprints. And they just heard it land, and it ran off into the forest. And so Dennis and Keith look at each other, and Dennis is like, what do you want to do? And Keith's like, let's go after it. Now, Dennis and Keith, they hunt in these woods all the time, and they see right away that the footprints, the tracks of this person or creature or whatever it is, they're about 14 inches long, and it appears to be a bipedal creature. It does not appear to be on 4 legs. Something's moving on 2 legs. And they're thinking about just how would this person be able to get on the roof? What animal runs around that has a 14-inch track that runs on 2 legs? Like, they're not really sure what to make of it. Is it a person? Is it a creature? We don't know. And so they follow the tracks into the woods, and the whole time they have this awful sensation that something's watching them. And from time to time, they would hear something a ways away from them that sounded like a big animal moving in the forest, but they could never quite get to it in time. And at some point, they started hearing noises behind them. And they're thinking, like, is it possible that this thing has run ahead of us and then looped back around and is now tracking us? Like, they were feeling really uncomfortable. And as they're about to just kind of abandon this search, because they've been looking for this thing for hours, they keep following its tracks, they get to a clearing, and they find this tiny cabin that neither of them had seen before, right in the middle of the clearing. And they see that these tracks lead right up to it, and they follow the tracks up to the cabin, and the tracks stop right outside the door. There's one door leading into this cabin, and the door is shut. And they're thinking, like, what animal can open and shut doors? And so Dennis starts immediately hitting on the door, trying to get this person to come outside and show themselves. We know you were over at Keith's property. Get out here. We followed you here. We know it's you. There's no sound inside. There's no movement inside. We're looking in the windows. There's nothing. Keith realizes, like, it's a bad look for us to have tracked this person to their house. We have guns. Like, this is a bad look for us. We can't be here. We need to leave and just let this go. They have a couple more choice words, and then they leave. And they decide, instead of going back through the woods, they go to the nearest road they could hear nearby. They go to the road, and they go to a payphone. They call Keith's father, who comes to pick them up. And when they hop in the car, Keith's dad is like, why do you have guns? And Keith and Dennis explain what happened, and they describe this cabin in the woods that they were just at. And Keith's dad is like, oh, I know who lives in that cabin. It's this guy who works at the tire shop. He's a loner type guy, older guy. No one really knows much about him. So Dennis is like, we got to go to that tire shop. I want to get a look at this guy. Keith's a little bit unsure, like he doesn't want to blow this out of proportion, but they ultimately decide that they're going to bring a beat up tire to this tire shop and ask to get it repaired to try to get a look at this person who apparently owns the cabin. So they go to this tire shop. They know that the front desk attendant is not the guy who owns the cabin. It's the actual mechanic who's in back. And so they give the tire over, and the front desk guy yells back to George. Says, hey, George, come out here, you got a tire. And so Keith would describe George coming out of the shadows to get the tire. And he's like the 6'5" older guy who looks up at Keith and Dennis. And he's got these orange eyes. Keith would say it was the most distinctive set of eyes he'd ever seen. And he looks up at them, and George has a moment of recognition that he's looking at the two men that just tracked him to his house. And Dennis and Keith are looking at him thinking, we know it was you. And they both recognize it. George looks down, walks away with the tire. And then when he finishes whatever he's doing with the tire, he rolls it out to the middle of the floor to stay in the shadows. Keith and Dennis are like, he didn't want to show himself again. He knows that we know he's the guy. Dennis and Keith leave and think, man, like, that's so weird. He's an old guy. I mean, he kind of fits the description, I guess. You know, he's a big guy, 14-inch tracks. That could be him. But none of it really added up. I mean, he's an older guy. How's he getting on the roof? Keith is like, I can't tell police what happened because I would have to admit that I stalked him to his house with a gun. That's how I know he's there, and he didn't commit a crime. At least I can't pin him to a crime. And so he can't tell the police. He doesn't want to tell his wife because his wife not only would have a big told you so moment, he knew that she would immediately want to leave, like move. And he did not have the financial resources to move. And so he decides to just kind of keep it to himself and hope that he does not run into George again. So for a few months, there's no sightings of anything strange happening at their house, at Keith and Diane's house. But in March of 1982, 3 months after their encounter with George at the tire shop, Dennis shows up at Keith's house. And he says, hey, get in, I want to show you something. And so Keith gets in Dennis's car, and they start driving, and Keith can tell that Dennis is taking him towards this cabin in the woods where George lives. And Keith says to Dennis, we can't do this. We cannot go to this guy's house. We know he did it, but what are we going to do? And Dennis goes, no. I just found out that George died. He's dead. So we can just go check it out right now. We can go check out his residence. And Keith is like, I feel bad about it, but okay, let's go check it out. And so they start driving down this one access road that would lead to George's cabin, and they find a cop car is sitting in the middle of the road. It would turn out that Dennis knew the cop, and he explained the whole strangeness behind this cabin and how it related to them. And the cop at first was very reluctant to give any information about why he was there or what was going on at the cabin, but ultimately he relented and said, actually, you know, I'm here because there's some strangeness with the cabin. We don't really know what to make of it, and you know, if you want to, I can give you a quick peek of what the cabin looks like. Keith and Dennis are like super intrigued, and they're like, okay. And so they go into this cabin, and there's nothing in it. There's basically a chair and a table, but that's it. There's no personal effects. There's no food. There's nothing. It's just this empty, tiny space. And Keith and Dennis are, you know, shocked. They're like, wow, this guy was living like a hermit, basically. And they thought that that was what the cop was referring to when he said there's some weirdness with this cabin. They're like, man, that's crazy. You know, George, how did he live like this for 40 years? Crazy. And the cop's like, no, that's not the weird part. He goes, that's the weird part. And he points at a sheet that's hanging down inside of the cabin. The cop goes over and pulls the sheet aside, and it revealed a metal door, a sliding door. And they slid it open, and immediately they're hit with this wet dog smell, like kind of a gross wet dog smell. And they go into this cell that had plate steel lining the walls with metal strips and rivets holding everything in place. It was like this metal encased tomb that they were in. And in the middle of the floor was a 10-foot chain link, and at the end there were shackles for wrists and for feet. And on the wall were all these scratch marks, old and new, all over the walls. And so the police officer's like, yeah, we're trying to figure out what old George was doing with this cell in his cabin in the middle of the woods. Keith and Dennis, they leave, and they go back into their car, and they're driving away, and neither of them are even talking about what they saw. But they know that something that was being held in that cage in the cabin had been the thing they had stalked. It had been the thing that had been stalking their property, Keith's property. It was the thing that was staring in the windows. It's all very unsettling. But Keith, Dennis, Diane never found out what it was. Keith would say, though, that there was no more stalking at his property once George had died. They never saw the eyes again. So no matter what this was, something was showing up at Keith and Diane's house and looking in the windows and, you know, stalking them. And something made tracks, got on the roof of Keith and Diane's house, ran into the woods and made its way back to George's cabin. Now, we don't know if that something was just George, or if it was some creature, some animal that was in that cage, or if it was something else. So let me know in the comments what you think it was and what happened, and I'll do my best to get back to as many people as I can. If you enjoyed this story, I would ask you to please gently drop kick the like button, and then also subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly 3 to 4 video uploads that sound an awful lot like this one you just heard today. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My handle is johnballin416. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is Mr. Ballin, same as my YouTube page. But no matter where I see you, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, or wherever, thank you so much for your support, and until next time, take care.